Hello, good evening, Father Murr. It's another conversation on Wednesday, May 8th. You are in Spain. I'm in America now, and we're bringing Deborah Tomlinson on to talk about the pilgrimage that we made to see you in southern Spain and some of our future plans. And then we'll be continuing with our regular conversation.
Great.
Well, welcome everybody, and hello to Father Murr, our friend.
Hello, Deborah. Hello, Robert.
It is good to see you again. Father Murr, I should tell you right off the bat, we have Andy Mosiak, who was there with us in Spain with you for the Lenten retreat and pilgrimage, and he is here with us, as well as the Jessies are also on watching. Rick and Mom.
Very good. Greetings to all of them, especially Andy.
Yes. And
I have to be very kind to Andy because I'm going to ask him for a tremendous favor one of these days.
Oh, so you liked my suggestion, I take it. So I'll have to call Andy and fill him in on what I have done.
Very good.
I'm jumping on because I have good news, Father. You know, we have such a demand for people to go on retreat and in Andalusia and on pilgrimage. And of course, you as the retreat master for 3 mornings and a wrap-up morning. And so we are releasing another retreat to our former pilgrims and supporters first, and then to everybody who's on the list. But Father, we have a lot on the list.
Great. That's great. So, very encouraging.
So it will be the last week of October. And of course, Robert, you know, Father, what happens on December 24th of this year?
That's the opening of the Great Jubilee of 2025. It's Christmas Eve.
So we're going to do a Rome pilgrimage for the opening of the Jubilee and for Christmas Eve in Rome, and have a day in Florence. And of course, we have Garabandal and Lourdes in August, and we have this great pilgrimage to Wisconsin. I just came back last week where I led a 4-night pilgrimage with 36 pilgrims, and it was fantastic.
That sounds fantastic to me. The Wisconsin deal really does. Sounds
it was, and you know that we went to the Norbertine Abbey, you know, that in Green Bay, just south of Green Bay, and we went to the National Shrine of St. Joseph on the feast day. It was wonderful, and I surprised the pilgrims with a stop at the Lambeau Field, and they really loved it. I was able to get them into the bowl, and they loved going into the bowl of Lambeau Field and seeing, as the locals call it, the Holy of Holies of the world.
That's right. That's right.
But and then we have, Robert, we have a pilgrimage with our friends for the flower prophecies for Guadalupe in the fall, and
to Mexico.
To Mexico.
With Monique and Joseph Gonzalez.
With Monique and Joseph, and we have a call with them today. Excellent. So we're getting ready to release that as well. So I just wanted to hop on and say hello. Glad to see you, and we will see you again in a few months. Looking forward to it. And I will let you gentlemen get on with your show. I know.
Great, thank you, Deborah. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, Father Murr.
Robert, it's incredible, but it sounds like we're doing something right.
Yeah, I think I think part of our charm is that we're authentically bumbling in some way.
Yes. If you've ever spoken anything true in your life, it was just that.
Well, yeah, a lot of glitz in a lot of mainstream media, but they've lost a lot of their authority now. People call them fake, etc. And there's not much that's fake about what we're doing.
No, we don't have time to make it fake.
Right. So we've got people watching us from various places. There's some. This is a live program right now, so we're not even sure how it's going to continue, because there's different directions we can take it. We're all thinking about pilgrimage because each of us, in a sense, by our very nature, is a pilgrim. Sort of the center of our faith and our conviction that the horizon of our lives, of our being, extends toward a eternal goal, which transcends this space and time, this world. So pilgrimage, to go on pilgrimage, to draw close to a place that's holy, is a metaphor for our entire life. We have here no lasting habitation. And a lot of people pass through a lot of difficulties, including ourselves. And our hopes are dashed at different times. And that's why when you go on pilgrimage and things become difficult at times, and you have to walk a long way, as you do on the Camino to St. James of Compostela, or you have things to eat that are hastily prepared and may not be sumptuous. This is somehow a metaphor for a type of existence which is in preparation for that feast which lies at the end of time, that ends all things. Any comment?
No, I think the whole deal of life being a pilgrimage is certainly certain. It is that. But what's great about pilgrimage too, combined with a retreat, and I'm not saying this because I'm the one giving the retreat talks. I don't mean that at all. This is a very that's not a push for what we're doing here. But
although, Father, we did have people say that you were tremendous, that you were very profound, moving.
Poor things. They probably never heard anyone speak in their entire lives, if that's what they're coming to conclude. My goodness. But I'm telling you, the idea of walking, of making a pilgrimage, and stopping to nourish oneself spiritually on the gospel and on meditations and on talks about holy things it makes it really a full retreat, You're learning along the way. You're not just walking and alone thinking. You're getting outside information, prayer time to digest all of the spiritual things that you've taken in. It's really good. And I saw Robert, I'm going to tell you something. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I've given retreats all my life. And on every retreat, you always have somebody who's not happy. Something is wrong. The food isn't right. This was the first time that I recall. It might have happened before, but I think I would have remembered it. This is the first time that I recall everyone being happy.
Wonderful.
There was an esprit de corps that was what was marvelous. I enjoyed myself. I really did. Did.
I think you're a big reason for that. And so I think these pilgrimages are becoming already, after one, they're becoming a tradition.
Well, that's good. We want to get people to heaven, Robert. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get souls to heaven.
All right.
Help people along the way.
I think that's a good point to center our podcast on and our conversation. Everything that we do is aimed at getting to heaven, which is a state of being in the presence of God, who is so awesome and beautiful that, in a sense, the entire fabric of our being is bathed in blessedness and in His holiness. And this is what we
That's beautifully put. That's beautifully put.
Yeah. And this is why the hints of that we get in this world and in the history of all the mystics who have these mystical experiences, and they said they feel they were in the presence of the Almighty and it was like nothing else. Even Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian who lived in the 1200s, he said, I've spent my life writing weighty tomes and being a theologian, parsing passages of scripture and the thinking of philosophers and trying to bring everything together in one unified intellectual whole. And he did it about as well as any human being could do. But he had a vision at the end of his life, and God somehow touched him, appeared to him, as the mystics do. And he told people after this occurred, I now realize all my writings are as straw. They are insignificant. They're dry. They're without life in comparison to what I briefly experienced. So it's a sign that this is like the transfiguration of Christ in the gospel, where Jesus was transfigured. He glowed. He shone. The cells of his body and the atoms of his that compose the cells were somehow transfigured by a different type of unearthly energy, so that even in this world, his disciples could see him as a glorified figure, as a glorified person. And this has happened.
Some of the theologians talking about that, the transfiguration, Robert, say that for that one moment in front of those three disciples, Christ permitted his divinity to shine.
Yeah.
Right? To prepare them for what? To prepare them for the tragedy and the embarrassment and the scandal, if you will, of the cross, of the crucifixion. And even that didn't help. They still ran away. Even after seeing the glory of his divinity, they ran away.
Yeah.
There's hope for you and me, Robert. Yeah, there's hope for us.
Well, I do think that that's what this is about. It's a reality, not just a theory. And it's a 2,000-year-old community which has passed through various crises, and we continue to pass through them today. It's a journey in a sense of all humanity, because we do hold that every human person is in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, each person has great, and as a recent Vatican document put it, citing Pope John Paul II from 1980, infinite dignity. And therefore, we cannot mistreat, oppress, cruelly mock, and shatter the hopes of individual human beings. We should slowly and ceaselessly create a community of brotherhood and love. So this church in the world is a sacrament. We recognize the human difficulties and human limitations. People have become fanatical. They become very lazy. They become very passionate. And these are human sins and human failings. But the ark of the church, this great vessel of the church, continues to sail through the centuries. And we're kind of watching all that process and trying to do our little part to comment on it, and to draw us back to the central purpose. And that's how I see what we're doing.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that. I think that from the beginning of these broadcasts, I'm really dating myself, aren't I, Robert? What do we call these broadcasts? Are they still called broadcasts?
Well, they call them podcasts.
Podcasts.
Yeah, they're
Well,
kind
at
of.
the beginning, when we started all this, we were intent, you and I, on helping people and helping ourselves, by the way, because we're in the same boat, get through what you and I considered a major crisis in the life of the Catholic Church, the church that for 2,000 years has taught the way. We both agree that she is in a mighty crisis today. And what we wanted to do was to tell people that there's hope, and not to give up hope, and to continue inside that bark of Peter, inside the church, not outside the church, inside, with the promise that, when you stop to look at it, there is no government older than the Catholic Church in the world. For 2,000 years, it has existed as a people and as if you will, a floating nation. We are together. So what we're trying to do is assure people that what we're going through right now, which is it is a crisis, is temporary, and we're going to get through it, and we're going to be stronger, and hopefully holier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think your emphasis on holiness and your emphasis on pilgrimage, your emphasis on saving souls is a repeated, necessary re-centering on the compass direction. We know that so many concerns will emerge. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. There'll be heresies. And at one point, even St. Paul says it is necessary that heresies should come in order for there to be some type of clarification. Each of these processes shouldn't surprise us. If we know that in 2,000 years we've seen almost everything. And so we know that the main task remains those things you just mentioned: the salvation of souls, the fidelity to the faith, and the seeking of holiness, with all the obstacles that are always present. And
Robert, we've talked about this before, and I don't mean to get back on it as a subject. I told you that Mother Pasqualina explained to me and described for me one day in 1954 when Pope Pius XII, whom she was the Pope's secretary for 42 years of his life, came in from a walk in the Vatican Gardens, almost trembling. And she asked what had happened, and he said that he had just witnessed the miracle of the sun of Fatima. No small thing for a pope to say. On a daily walk in the Vatican Gardens, he stood frozen for the longest time, and he saw the sun, the dancing sun, I believe she called it, of Fatima. And then she asked him, I was enthralled with this story, because Pius XII to me he's my personal patron saint. I think the world of him. And Mother Pasqualina was explaining this, and she asked him, was there anything said in that vision? Did you receive a message in that vision, right? And he said, and these are her words, one word only. And that word was apostasy. All right. Now, you'll get a kick out of this too. And I remember smiling when she said it. In those years, in the 50s and 60s, apostasy was a word, I don't know, out of the Old Testament. Just nobody talked about apostasy. It was almost an impossibility. That's what he came away with, was that. And Mother Pasqualina said she listened to that, and as soon as her conversation with the Pope ended, she ran off to a room and looked up in a German dictionary the meaning of apostasy, because she wasn't even sure of it. It was simply not used. And when she found out what it was, she held that as something very special. When she transmitted that message to me, I found that something very special too. And so when I started seeing the beginning of apostasy, the happenings, even in the late 70s, it didn't shock me like it's shocking a lot of people. Yeah. It didn't shock me. I said, yes, that's what was supposed to come from. It was supposed to be happening in these days. And I just don't find any shock in that. I find it a major problem that we have to deal with, and we have to work with, and we have to get better from. It's a plague on the church.
Father,
not shocked.
Someone is asking us, what is the difference between apostasy and heresy?
Yeah, well, this is exactly what Mother Pasqualina had to do. She had to go around to look up the meaning of it. Apostasy is denying the Christian faith once you are a Christian. The apostasy is having been born into a Catholic family, baptized the sacraments, and arriving at one point of your life saying, I don't believe any of that anymore. That's apostasy.
Okay. And
that's
the essence
apostasy from the faith. Heresy is,
yeah.
I don't believe, a particular a particular point of the Catholic faith.
Okay.
I think
So-
we're. Are we connected, Robert?
Yes, I think so. Can you hear me?
Or are we? I don't know. I think we're having some technical problems.
I guess you cannot hear me, Father? I'm sorry.
We've got. Are you able to hear me, Robert?
Yes, I am able to hear you.
For some reason, the screen is frozen.
Okay. Well, then I think it's okay, Father.
Anyway,
Father, we can hear you. Okay, maybe he's going to try to go off and come back. So I think his screen froze, and that's what he'll try to do. So I think what he was telling us in answer to your question about the difference between apostasy and heresy is the apostasy is the departure from a faith once held in toto, entirely, a rejection of the entire thing. Heresy, a single or point of that faith where you depart from the established and accepted teaching. Here he comes again.
here I am. It's
Can you
magic.
hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. What happened was your screen froze and we heard everything you said, and then now you've left and returned, and so we're okay again.
In a little time, in a little time, you shall see me. In a little time, you shall see me not. Yes. Anyway, that's good. So anyway, the explanation was clear, right?
Yes, and I think the central question then would be what's happened in our time that makes apostasy an option, and that is, I would say, these various isms which are opposed to the central concept of the faith itself, which is finally Jesus Christ and what he said and what he did and what happened to him, and then the creation through him of his church. All of that is rejected by various isms. It's communism, it's some type of humanism as opposed to any concept of divinity. These modern isms reject the very concept of a divinity, of a supernatural realm that exists, of any end to human life that is beyond our physical death, any existence of the soul. All these concepts are coming probably ever more strongly forward due to the scientific progress of man, which leads him to think that he's become like God and understood all these things. But because he's left out the very central reason, the logos, the motor, the understanding of all this, he truncates it. He eliminates the entire second story of existence, which would be the supernatural realm, the metaphysical, meta meaning above, and physical meaning physical reality. What is above physical reality is eliminated by modern science. Therefore, theology used to be a subject, the study of God, which was considered the queen of the sciences. And in many universities in European history for centuries, theology was the number one topic. But it's mocked as a topic in modern universities. It's regarded as the subject for people of weak minds. So I think it's primarily the triumph of a type of science which claims to have total knowledge and eliminates the metaphysical, and therefore eliminates Christ, eliminates God, and this is the world we face. And it has two particular aspects. One would be the communist form, and the other would be a type of Western humanism form, but both of them eliminate the divine.
Yeah, let me add to that, Robert. I get a kick out of this. I just had as guests here a lawyer and his wife and their children. They came for a couple of days, And we were talking about, they brought up the subject of science taking over religion, where religion was, science has taken over its place. Actually, you have to be very careful with that, because the last great scientific discovery or claim was, that I recall in history, and we in philosophical anthropology, we studied this closely, was polygenesis. Now let me just explain where I'm going with this. Polygenesis was accepted by the scientific world as gospel. And what polygenesis says is trying to explain the races, human races. Polygenesis says that human beings began at 5, 6, or 7 different times. It depends on what scientific school you belong to. In the world, in 5 to 7 different places at 5 to 7 different times. In other words, there was no Adam and Eve. There was no one mother, one father that began the human race. The human race began at different times in the world, in different places. This was held as absolutely true by the scientific community. And the church was mocked. And I'm talking about the years 1920, 1930s, even to the 1940s. The church was openly mocked by the scientific community because we held that the gospel, that the gospel and the Old Testament of the Bible teaches that all human beings are related by one man and one woman called Adam and Eve. Whether you believe in their names, that's not the whole point. The point is that there was one set of parents for all of humanity. Now, the church was openly mocked for that. You know who was not openly mocked? The scientific community. They took this to such an extent, to such a place, that they denied the other possibilities, even considered you had to be a buffoon to believe in one set of parents. And who grabbed onto this was Nietzsche, and also, after him, Adolf Hitler. And Hitler said the following. Now tell me if this doesn't make sense. It's one of the few times that Hitler made sense, logical sense. If this is true, that the human race began at 5 different times in 5 different places of world history, then the race that first began has to be the superior race, right? Because it's got more hours, it's got more flight hours. Now, he took that to the craziest extent, and he decided that he belonged to the first race that ever existed, which is absolutely untrue. After examination, and thanks to, in great part to DNA, but even before that, genetics, the study of genetics, this is absolutely, it's mocked today as absolutely ridiculous, because we know today, for a scientific fact, that every human being in the world is related to every other human being, and we all come from one set of parents. Monogenesis, it's called from one set of parents. Polygenesis, from many sets of parents. Now, my whole point is that those who gave up on religion and said that science had all of the answers made a major mistake that caused the deaths of millions of people. That mistake, and they were all following science. So what I'm saying is, be careful when you're going to follow science. That science knows everything. Science does not know everything. There are just as many mistakes in science as there are discoveries. One other point, Robert, is a thing called modernism. Modernism, according to Pius X, 1905, is the synthesis of all heresies. It's every heresy that ever existed put into one. And it is a whole spirit that overtook Protestantism, first of all, but it waited and waited and waited until the 1960s to hit and try to overtake the Catholic Church. And we are still suffering from this dilemma today, modernism.
Well,
and it is very close, getting back to that question that was asked, what is the difference between heresy and apostasy? In the case of modernism, very little is the difference, because to be called the synthesis of all heresies is almost apostasy, and it is. This is the world we're living in. So if you know these things, and I'm saying if you know these things and you're aware of them, they're in your world. They're making up the world that you live in. You have to be aware of some things to be able to combat them, at least to be able to control them. And I think we're just waking up to the fact that our church, in great part, has been taken over by modernism. That's it. Anyway, knowing these things, I don't say these things, Robert, and you know this. I don't say these things to shock people or to get them upset. I'm saying them, hopefully, to educate, that they not be shocked and upset, but they stay the course, knowing what the problem is and knowing the enemy.
Well, those are wonderful clarifying remarks, Father. Thanks. To put our position into focus. And my conclusion, there's several things that you said that we could take further, but there is a need for people in the church to be as thoughtful and as wise as anybody who is a scientist or a modernist.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And to renew what we might call Catholic scientific studies, because as I take it, science is a process of proposing hypotheses for explaining the functioning or the true nature of various things. And it does experiments, and it sees how those things respond to the experiments, and it draws conclusions. And therefore, it's a reasoning process. But the corruption of science, which is profound today, I would say, perhaps more so today than ever in history, even by particular payments of money, so that scientists will distort their experiments in order to come up with some answer to a medical problem, and the pharmaceutical company wants this answer to be accepted. And we've now discovered, and this is not very widely known really, but the great medical journals are no longer even they have lost their authority, have become corrupt. Right. And as shameful as what has happened in our Catholic Church with the corruption of various men and various women in the church, and the corruption that is in some way in all of us, but we kind of kept it under wraps by maintaining certain principles and catechetical structures where we said these are the limits. But in the society that we're living in, which is a modernistic society, Pope Benedict said, man must not do everything that he can do. And in our society, without moral restraints, a very relativistic, modernistic society, people are very drawn to the idea they do whatever they want and they pay for it. And they are not going to have any consequences because there is no judgment. And so we are in a chaotic struggle for truth, for goodness, and for beauty, the three universals, and for continuing the fidelity to the gospel of Christ. These are the things that we must stand for, and each of these things is under attack. But it's not for us to become unscientific, but I think we should have scientists in the Catholic Church who would be the respected scientists among the entire population of the world. And
as what you're saying, Robert, is and you're drawing from one of the brilliant men of our times, Pope Benedict. I think anyway. Everything I've ever read of him is beautiful and brilliant. But what he's talking about too just because you can do something doesn't mean you may do it.
Of course, exactly. That's right.
That's this, and this is it. And science today, you know, Robert, when you and I were growing up, I before you was growing up, but we had peer reviews. Science was built on peer reviews. Theology had peer reviews, philosophy peer reviews, medicine peer reviews. You would publish an article of a finding, any finding, and it was meant to be read by your peers and then reacted to.
Yeah.
That's, you know what has happened? Today, we're so out of whack that if what I say goes along with the theory that's popular today, a popular theory, there is no peer review.
Yeah.
There is no peer review. It's ridiculous. So my point is that science isn't even being scientific.
Yeah, there's been a terrible corruption in our mental processes, and it's related to money, and it's related to pleasure, and this has led our society to propose very cruel and very inhuman behaviors, and even to create structures of law which are unprecedented, and they are against human dignity. But it's very difficult to argue against them because we've entered into an irrational mental world where fundamental principles have been changed and or set aside. And what we look at when we see the structures of the Roman Catholic Church with its beautiful architectonic teachings about human nature and what we should be afraid of in terms of what can destroy our soul, what can assist our soul to become what it should be. Those are like these old aqueducts you see falling down, sometimes leading into Rome. These great catechetical and pastoral teachings and practices and even devotions which were practiced in the church over centuries now seem to lie in ruins. And people have proposed new and modern psychological techniques, etc. But these great traditions of the church, which brought forth very great saints and provided the heights of artistic and even scientific culture, have fallen into ruins, and they need to be rebuilt, I think, just as aqueducts. If you want to carry water into Rome, you have to have some type of pipeline or aqueduct. And we have now decided that since about 50 years ago, we have a new church which is much more humane and wiser than it ever was before. And we've set aside those monumental structures that were built up by all of our forefathers. And this is leaving us without our heritage. And the task will be for decades and if perhaps centuries to come. It will never cease. And we are just
on that point, Robert. I get a lot of letters, a lot of emails today, as do you. People who have come back to the faith after being absent for 50 years, 60 years. I've gotten letters from somebody who for 70 years was not a practicing Catholic and have come back to the church. Almost all of them say what brought them back to the church was the idea of what the church always taught, the stability of what the church always taught. And they always say this, most of them say this: it occurred to me what I had been robbed of.
okay.
Right? What was stolen from me, what wasn't there, and I'm discovering it on my own. This is happening incredibly with more and more frequency.
Well,
It really is. People are waking up to a lot of things.
I think our faith is that the gates of hell shall not prevail.
Absolutely.
But we also are very aware that in different times and places, a lot of losses have occurred. And you're talking about an intentional theft. And I think that reminds me of Jesus referring to the garden, which was supposed to be tended. And then they said to him, there's weeds growing up everywhere. And he said, well, some enemy has come and done this, has planted along with the good seed, the seeds that produce weeds. And I was actually just doing some weeding myself. And some of those weeds have thorns on them. And if you can't.
Aren't they terrible? Aren't they terrible?
You know what I'm talking about?
The other day I went out and pulled a weed out. Unbeknownst to me, it had thorns that were so thin. For 2 days I was going around with these things in my fingers.
Okay.
Yes, they're stubborn little devils.
So in the garden of the church, in the vineyard of the Lord, there's going to be a necessity to do some weeding, although he also said at another occasion, let them grow up together. So we do have these paradoxical, in a sense, contradictions. We're supposed to be good stewards and tend to the garden and tend to the vineyard. At the same time, we're supposed to allow whatever is growing to keep growing. But in any case, if we do try to take children and form them and to make them different from spoiled little brats, and we try to make them into noble, courageous, self-sacrificing men and women who can have families and be citizens, it's an endless task. It's a garden to tend, and it's the task of the pastors of the church to tend this garden. And they can become careless. They can be poor shepherds. They can let the enemies into the garden, the foxes into the hen yard, which also actually, myself, I had that experience as well. I left my fences around my chicken yard a little bit, somehow a space was there and a weasel got in and I heard the screeching in the night and all the chickens were slain, a dozen, in about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Anyway, so we can have losses. People can become miserable. They can become addicted. They can become suicidal, and they can become cruel. And in order to form souls which are both strong and yet compassionate, it's, I think, the noblest of tasks. It was the task of Jesus himself. Come follow me, he said. But they executed him. And the church is not going to be without persecution as well. But still, there is no higher task.
Well, yeah, we keep talking about the church. And I do this myself. The church this, the church that. Who is the church? Who is the church? Church is you and me, Robert, and it's most of the people we know is the church. The hierarchy of our church is a particular problem today. Well, I guess it's always been a particular problem, probably, but it's certainly one today. Why is that? Because the hierarchy is not.
Okay. Father Murr, as far as I can tell, you have frozen again. I hope you sign on again. I'm sorry to everyone watching. However, there was something I wanted to bring up, which relates, in fact, to the hierarchy, to the leadership of the church. And it was an experience I had in Rome, and I have a couple of slides to show. So as we wait for Father Murr, I wrote a letter yesterday, one of my Moynihan letters, which you can get a copy of and get a free subscription to, no cost, by going to InsideTheVatican.com, and right on that homepage, there is a place to put your email in and sign up for the Moynihan letters, which I'm starting to write again after some weeks of thinking things over. And what I went back to, and one of the first letters I've written in several weeks, has to do with this man, Armenian Cardinal Gregorio Pietro the 15th, Gregory Peter the 15th, Agajanian. He was born in Georgia next to Armenia in 1895. He died in 1971. But what few people realize is that he almost became Pope not only in 1958 when John the 23rd was elected, but even strong support in 1963 when Paul VI was elected. He was a leader in the Catholic Church. The Armenian people have an Armenian Catholic Church, and he was the head of the Armenian Church. And what happened in Rome? I was walking in the month of April, so about 4 weeks ago, and I came across a church which is under restoration, and I went inside. It was a beautiful Armenian liturgy. It was called St. Nicholas of Tolentino. It's located near Piazza Barberini and down the hill from the American Embassy in Rome, which is up near Via Veneto. So in that little section between Barberini and the Embassy is St. Nicholas of Tolentino, and that was given 100 years ago to the Armenians. And next to it is an Armenian seminary with a dozen or two Armenian young men studying for the priesthood. And the liturgy was a beautiful Armenian liturgy, which is similar to the Maronite liturgy. It's an Eastern liturgy. And it reminded me that Agajanian, and there was a pamphlet on the table in this church about his life. And it described the election of 1958. And John the 23rd said that the candidacy of Agajanian was so popular that he was equal to John the 23rd. And he said the votes bubbled in the boiling water like chickpeas in a kettle. Sometimes he was ahead and at the top, and sometimes I was ahead and at the top. And finally, John the 23rd was elected, and he told this story about 3 months later to the Armenian seminarians. And therefore, we know that this occurred during that election in 1958. And what would have happened if Agajanian had been elected? He would have been a key figure. Okay, well, that's the inside of that church of St. Nicholas Tolentino. And of Tolentino, that's the Church of the Armenians in Rome. And what else do we have? We would have had a man at the head of the Catholic Church who was from the East, and he would have, that's the liturgy that was held that day. I took this picture on my iPhone. And that light streaming down from a window seemed to me significant. And I almost would use the phrase lux ex oriente, light from the East. The Eastern churches, as even Pope Francis has said, have preserved a certain sense of the awesomeness and austere dignity of God. We in the West, with our tendency to humanize, we've had, of course, the Renaissance and the humanistic emphasis for 500 years in Western culture. The East had a more iconic Eastern mystical oriented vision of the nature of God. Agajanian would have brought that and also the entire Eastern world into closer union with the Catholic Church. And that would have given us a different geopolitical weight as the Eastern Christians were oppressed for decades by the Soviets, and as the new world, post-Soviet world, which is, we might call it the globalizing or the globalist world, is attempting to reach a globalist solution for many human problems without taking into sufficient account the truths and the teachings of the Christian faith. So it would have given the Christian faith a greater strength to have the Eastern and Western Christians reunited. And then I meditated on this, and I came across in more recent days, well, this is a picture of John the 23rd, Angelo Roncalli, the man who was elected Pope at that conclave where Agajanian also received many votes. Yes, and there's so I then was thinking of another event which occurred in 1978. This man in the large photo is Metropolitan Nicodeme, and he's meeting there with John Paul I, and this is why I also thought of Father Murr, because John Paul I only reigned for 33 days, and Father Murr has written a book called Murder in the 33rd Degree about the last days of John Paul I. And what's funny or odd or curious is that on September 5th, this Metropolitan Nicodeme from Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, visiting Rome, visited John Paul I just a few days after he was elected. But Nicodeme, after speaking for several minutes privately with John Paul I and telling him how deeply he respected the Roman Catholic Church and how he longed for closer union between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, suddenly leaned over and collapsed and died of a heart attack right in the arms of John Paul I on the 5th of September, 1978. John Paul I then died about 3 weeks later. I take it as another curious event, and I wanted to discuss this with Father Murr, but for some reason, his internet seems to be insufficient today to carry forward this discussion. We've been waiting now for 5 or 6 minutes for him to return. I apologize, and I'm sorry that I had to take over the conversation. Oh, Donna Eberly writes, wow, you could do a whole show on this subject, Dr. Moynihan. So I think I'll take that as another sign and say that, okay, we have Judy. Thank you, Mr. Moynihan. Your letters are quite helpful. Well, thank you, Judy. I have some plans to write a series now, which, Father Murr.
I made it back just in time to say goodnight, or what? Say
Okay,
goodnight,
well, you know what I did? I went to the slides and I talked about the 1958 papal election where Cardinal Agajanian almost was elected, as John the 23rd himself said. And then I talked about the 1978 death of Metropolitan Nicodeme on September 5th, more or less in the arms of John Paul I.
Yes.
And John Paul I later, a few days later, speaking to the priest of Rome, said, I just experienced the death of a wonderful Christian, Metropolitan Nicodeme, who spoke words to me that were the most beautiful I've ever heard in my life about his faith, his hope for the Christian church to survive even under the Soviets, who at that time were still very oppressive. And then John Paul I, 3 weeks later, also died. And one of our, so I was saying in the case of Agajanian, who was Armenian, who had a liturgy that was ancient and sort of Eastern, if he had become Pope, the idea of reunion between the Orthodox and the Catholics would have taken on new intensity.
And you know, Robert, that's exactly where it should have gone. That's exactly where it should have gone. It should have gone, first of all, to the reunification of the East and West. That's what the ecumenism promised to begin with. The problem was that it was taken over and it went more to the reunification of Catholics and Protestants. And unfortunately, some of the things that have been done in the present papacy, pontificate, have been really problematic for that reunification to happen.
Right. You are so right. And this latest document on the blessings has been denounced by entire churches in the East. And we had one reader write to us that this should become the topic of an entire hour conversation. So
I don't disagree. I think it would be very good.
It does seem to me that people are very opposed, some forces we might call them, are very opposed to Christians ceasing their disunity and reuniting. If we were one family with brothers and sisters all over the world, we could stand a little more strongly against what we might call the globalist assault.
If nothing else, Robert, if nothing else, if we were reunited with the East, we would be able to talk about the joy of Christ in our lives, because one of the things that joyful Christ proclaimed was that all be one. And now we are divided, and that is always a bone of contention. It's always it's a scandal also to the world, not just a scandal to us. It's a scandal to the world. The world is saying, look, they can't even get along in themselves. This is it.
Well, yeah, that's the final word then for our conversation. Jesus, at the end of his life, celebrated the Last Supper. The next day he would be executed. As he prayed at the Last Supper, he lifted his eyes toward heaven and he said, Father, I pray that they may all be one. It was his last prayer.
As you and I are one.
As you and I are one. So this is his prayer and it's his will. The work to do this is vast, difficult, because there's 1,000 years of various problems and conflicts and distrust has been built up. But we seem to be getting closer to overcoming these things 50 years ago. But so many times as we took steps in this direction, something seemed to happen to stop it from continuing. And
we seem to be getting to the end of our program, Robert. I'm getting notifications.
Okay.
Say good night, Gracie.
Okay, Father Murr, thank you for another wonderful conversation. God bless.
Thank you, Robert. And thanks to all of our listeners. It's great.
We hope to see you next week.
God bless. Thank you, Robert.